Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Just a few thoughts before we get going. Yes, this has been easily the most dramatic, blood-spattered and spectacular week in British politics since I started reporting it more than 30 years ago. But for people's jobs and savings, there is much more important stuff to think about. Now, I think it's too early to say whether or not so-called Project Fear was grossly overblown. The markets jagged down in shock, but they've now recovered. The FTSE's had its best week since 2012. And connected to that, of course, the pound is sharply down. But a lower pound is, for exporters, excellent news. It's been too high for too long. And other parts of the world now want to take advantage of Brexit. Australia and New Zealand are already talking about a new trade deal. But, leading banks have been gathering this week to discuss how many people they're going to move from London to Dublin or Paris or Frankfurt. George Osborne, who is still Chancellor of the Exchequer, still thinks we face a post-Brexit recession. It's very clear, he said, that the country is going to be poorer. The university sector is extremely worried, and at least one airline, EasyJet, is looking into moving to the continent to protect its business interests. Basically, a lot of powerful business people are sitting back and watching very uneasily. Business hates uncertainty. So, nothing matters more now than doing a deal to keep European markets as open as possible. And that can't be done until we have a proper, functioning government. And that can't happen until we have a new Prime Minister. So, back to the gory spectacle and our paper review. Welcome to you all. Now, I normally do the front pages, but frankly, everyone knows what's on the front pages, and we have a fantastic spread of bright red ink and gore and cartoons and so forth. Who's going to take us off?
Well,
Phil?
let's start with the, in a week of cartoonish politics, let's start with the cartoon in the Sunday Times. What you've got here is Theresa May kicking Michael Gove in the back, stabbing Boris Johnson, stabbing David Cameron. This was the week in which the modernisation of the Conservative Party, which began with Theresa May declaring they were the nasty party all those years ago, has really eaten itself, absolutely consumed itself.
She didn't actually say that. She said we are seen as the nasty party.
You're seen as a nasty party. But I mean, it was a compliment to her, because it was the sense that people had of the Conservative Party. And it was the point at which they started to recover in public estimation. And this week, that project, that David Cameron was at the front of, has absolutely, totally eaten itself like revolutions tend to.
And the inevitable question is what happens next, Shabby? And you've shaken the Sunday Times front page there, which is basically against this idea, as we heard on the news, of a coronation.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Tory rivals unite to torpedo May's coronation. So the Leave candidates for the party leadership, Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom, who are both feature in the Sunday Times today, either an interview or an article, are both saying, well, she's not representative. You know, if the country voted to leave, then we need a leave.
A Brexit leader.
Yes, and they don't want this kind of process by which the Conservatives would somehow corral around May. But the thing about the Conservative Party is that they are quite ruthless, and they don't really pay much heed to things like a democratic process of electing a leader.
We'll come on to that later in terms of Labour. But yes, a coronation, Ian, would happen because everybody else dropped out, leaving only one candidate, and therefore no need for a ballot.
I think that's very unlikely. You can see the logic of it. They'll say, well, in the interest of national unity, in the interest of getting a new Prime Minister quickly to calm the markets and all the rest of it, there is a certain logic to it. But nobody has mentioned in any of the papers that it was Theresa May back in 2003 who said that there had to be a ballot to elect Michael Howard. Now, he was the only one, and she was party chairman at the time, and she insisted that there had to be a ratification. So I'm not so sure that, I mean, I don't think this is coming from her camp by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think she particularly wants a coronation, but you can see the logic of it.
Legitimacy questions, obviously, if that happens. Now, the most brutal front page of all was the Mail on Sunday. Gove is a political psychopath, says Rachel Johnson, Boris Johnson's sister. And hypocrite, they say about it.
Well, we'll come on to that in a second, but their headline is hypocrite, and the Mail on Sunday have come out very powerfully for Theresa May today, just the same as the Daily Mail has, which is unusual because they usually disagree with each other on these things. This is a rather odd story, saying that because Andrea Leadsom, at some point a few years ago,
Only
said
3
we
years
shouldn't
ago.
leave the EU. But I mean, she was a government minister.
Well, it's
there
more
was
than
collective
that. It's more than that,
responsibility.
Ian.
at
What
that
she says
point.
in there, I mean, what she's quoted as saying in there is that leaving the European Union will be an economic disaster. It's pretty strong.
Which was the government policy at the time, and she was a government
Well,
minister.
that's
so there was
okay then,
collective.
isn't
Well, that's fine
well,
then.
I'm
I
just
mean,
saying
change
there's
your
collective
mind.
responsibility.
The thing about it is that we are
I'll ask
still,
her about
all
that,
the time
clearly.
that we're having this conversation about the Tory rivals, none of them has presented us with what, as you rightly point out, we desperately need. If we are leaving, what's the plan? How are we leaving? Do you want a Norway model? Do you want the single market? Do you not tell us so that we know what's happening and we can make a decision?
Now,
And that's something that...
to be fair to him, the man who has come nearest to the plan is Michael Gove, who has said we won't be in the single market and laid out his vision in a long
that
speech.
will
And there's
be
an
the
interview in the Sun.
task.
But what does that
well,
mean?
exactly.
Let's come
What
to the
does that
interview
mean? We won't
in
be
the
in the
Sun.
single
Well,
market.
I mean, here's
Well, it needs
a
to
very
be in the single
the-
market.
the-
That's what he
Guys,
that's what he argued
let's,
for.
let's get to the Sun.
The Sun
the
have a very good interview with Michael Gove, where they lead on the fact that Boris Johnson now won't answer his calls. He's leaving lots of voicemail messages for his former friend Boris Johnson, and the poison that has been injected into Tory politics is clear. Now, I think Michael Gove this week gave a speech in which he was a very substantive speech, an odd speech in a way for a leadership launch, because it contains so much. And what Gove's message is let's not just talk about Europe, we've also got a country to run, because in all of this stuff, they're forgetting that actually they're still the government, things still go on, there's still a health service, still welfare policy, still education. Is anybody doing anything other than this?
You say that they haven't shown what they're going to do. Well, Michael Gove gave a 40-minute speech, which, if you listen to it, was very detailed in what he would do. Theresa May was quite detailed. Now, Andrea Leadsom's launching tomorrow. She's on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Leadsom, I can be the new Thatcher, apart from the fact that she never actually said that
Well,
in the
that's
interview.
a really clear plan, isn't it? I mean, I think
Well,
it
hang
all
on a
leads
minute.
into...
Let me actually tell you what she wants to do.
Go ahead.
I think Andrea Leadsom, I think, is a really fresh face in this contest, and that will be an advantage and a disadvantage to her. She's not that well known in the voluntary party, so she's got to use interviews like the one that you're about to do with her to really project herself, to reach people. And I think she's got the personality to do that. She's very clear in her political background, her political ideology. It's very different from Theresa May's in many
Ian,
ways.
you know the voluntary wing of the Conservative Party pretty well. What's your sense of how they're thinking at the moment as they watch this extraordinary thing develop?
I was talking to a Conservative MP this morning who had held some kind of social do in his constituency last night, and he said that there was very little appetite for Michael Gove, that they viewed him as doing an Ed Miliband, who stabbed his brother in the back. They see that Michael Gove's done something worse than that. Not only did he stab Boris Johnson, he stabbed David Cameron in the back. That's their perception. He said the overwhelming majority were in favour of Theresa May, but they want to hear more from Andrea Leadsom.
But Ian, I mean, there's this line that the new Thatcher is all over the place. But we've got
It's
to
a
remember,
lazy line.
it is a lazy line.
Really
Because you've got to
lazy
remember,
line.
Margaret Thatcher had been in Parliament for 16 years when she became leader of the Conservative Party. She'd been a cabinet minister. She was a national figure, not a popular figure, but she was a national figure. And so to become Prime Minister 5-6 years after becoming a member of Parliament is extraordinary.
Can I just interrupt this?
One second.
No, wait a minute. Can I just make the
on
point?
that, Stephen
Sorry,
Crabb
just
says
give
he's
Rachel
got
a
more
chance this
experience than Margaret Thatcher, and he's only been in the
Rachel's
cabinet
turn
for a
Rachel's
year
turn
and a half.
next.
I mean, before we get bogged down in this, I mean, I know it's important, but if you pan back a little bit, The Observer, the editorial, has made a very good point, which is, you know, after a week of chaos and rancour, who will save us from this parade of pitiful leaders?
Jeremy
It's
Corbyn.
something that Stephen Bush picked up on in the New Statesman as well. He was saying, you know, part of the reason why there's so much sort of internal focusing on internal spat and rivalries that you two seem to enjoy and love talking about so much, is because they're actually
a good job yourself.
because they're actually incapable of looking outwards. They actually don't have what it takes to look outwards and lead us, and that's actually really worrying.
It might be said that one of the woeful leaders at the moment, Rachel, is Jeremy Corbyn.
It might be said that one of the woeful things is the fact that he has an attempted coup.
Very good.
By
Very good.
by the PLP, which is completely
And why do you
out
think
of
that
touch
is?
with
It's
the
because they
membership.
think he's useless and he couldn't become Prime Minister.
So we've got a very interesting democratic problem inside the Labour Party, don't we? The membership overwhelmingly back Jeremy Corbyn. They were out in large numbers saying so again, but the voters and the MPs don't. So you've got these two rival electorates fighting each other. Is there anything...
Very, very important piece in the Sunday Mirror where Jeremy Corbyn has a short piece in which he says, in terms, for the first time really, that he will be a candidate if there is a challenge against him. Now, we thought that was the case, but he makes it absolutely clear here that he's not, as he puts it himself, with unintended irony, I'm going nowhere. So if there is a challenge this week, he's quite clearly trying to hang on till Chilcot. On Wednesday, and he has made it plain that he's going to stand if anybody challenges him. Now, if that happens, there's every chance he might win that subsequent election because of his popularity amongst the members.
So what happens then?
At that point, the Labour Party may split because 172 Labour MPs have declared no confidence in him. And you can't undeclare that once you've said it.
Can I just make the point
Rachel, very
that,
quickly, and then Ian.
you know, this is where he's offering a sort of, this letter that he set out in the Mirror is him offering an amnesty. He's saying, look, you know...
But the deal involves him being the leader of the Labour Party.
You have to be powerful to offer an amnesty.
He's saying there's bad blood and let's get around it. But I think we need to examine the reasons for him remaining as well. It's not, you know, because he's been bloody-minded. It's not because he's hanging on for Chilcot. It's because he has a democratic mandate to do that.
And a lot of people coming out onto the
And a lot of
streets.
people support not just him, but the kind of policies that he represents, i.e. the first time that the British public has had a properly anti-austerity platform in a party, and that's actually really important.
Rachel,
way beyond him.
What do you think happens to the Labour Party if he is pushed out now in some kind of parliamentary coup? What happens next?
I don't know how he could be pushed out. I mean, as he has said...
or if he's persuaded, strong-armed into standing down, but it's perceived the MPs did it to him against the party
But
membership.
again, I think what we're not understanding about the reasons for him remaining is that he is someone who's trying to, you know, democratise the party. He's someone who believes very much in grassroots democracy. He believes that that's how change happens. So the idea that he would be persuaded to do something so fundamentally undemocratic, I just don't see it.
Ian, you've got the front of the Observer.
Well, the
there.
Observer have this amazing story that Jeremy Corbyn's aides, by which they mean Seamus Milne, his Director of Communication, they're refusing to let him have a meeting with Tom Watson, the elected deputy leader of the Labour Party. Now, I find this absolutely astonishing. That
It's true.
Well, you say it's true. It's on the front page. It's by Daniel Boffey, a reputable journalist. Are you saying he's made it up?
I'm saying that they've denied
All right.
it. I'm saying we
he's
can't
got it from
possibly
somewhere.
know.
You're in a pretty poor position if you won't even have a meeting with your deputy leader.
All right, let's move on to... There's a couple of other big stories we must cover, one of which is Europe. Phil, we've been talking about British politics. This has European-wide implications, what's happened.
Well, exactly. I mean, we do love all the leadership stuff, and it does matter who's the Prime Minister, but it's worth pointing out, as the Observer does, in two spreads, actually, that the shenanigans here have a series of impacts in other countries too. That there's a lot going on in Brussels, there's a lot going on across Europe, and that the exit of Britain from the European Union is going to have a series of consequences for the European Union itself. Right. And there's a series of big questions which we must be careful not to lose as we worry over whether Andrea Leadsom can be Prime Minister.
We'll discuss that later on. Now, Rachel, if you can do the Chilcot inquiry in about 30 seconds, we've got time to talk briefly about Caroline Ahern. If not, not. So there's no pressure at all.
It's just to say that Chilcot is coming on Wednesday. David Davis, the MP and ex-Foreign Office Minister, has written today about that in the Mail, saying obviously it's long overdue, and he's cautioned against having a sort of generic everyone was to blame. He really thinks we should focus on who was really responsible for what happened, i.e. Tony Blair.
Marvellous. Now, Caroline Ahern's tragic death, very sad death, all over the papers. I have to ask you all, best Caroline Ahern moment, best Mrs Merton moment?
Well, I'm going to go for not the obvious one. I loved it when she said to Barbara Windsor, she said, Barbara, you're one of us. She said, you're a great big film star, but you're still common as muck.
That's right. And she was pretty disobliging to Germaine Greer as well. Do you remember that one?
Was there mention of slapper involved?
OK. But she was a fantastic...
You made me
she's
say
one of those
that.
comedians who people kind of felt very emotionally about, wasn't she, Ian?
She was.
She got through to us all.
She will be forever remembered for Mrs Merton, but she did so much more than Mrs Merton. And I watched the episode last night, and that actually, Mrs Merton dates a little bit. With the royal family, she was the voice of Gogglebox. And the Fast Show, that was really where she made her name. A really sad loss.
All right, thank you, all of you.